Hi guys, in today's video I'm going to talk about one of the most neglected and underrated qualities when it comes to developing an athlete, and that is deceleration training. I think the reason why it's often neglected or not given as much emphasis as it should be is one, because it occurs almost as a byproduct of training and people think they're already working it, and two, because let's face it, when you're speaking about athletic qualities you want to know which player is the fastest, who's the strongest, who changes direction well, forgetting that deceleration is a vital part of the latter. So Mark Kovacs's 2008 article tells us there's 4 physical factors underpinning deceleration, or at least 4 anyway, and you'll soon see how the factors relate into other qualities. So dynamic balance, this should be, for me, the sort of end of your balance stage progressions, which I spoke about the other day. So the ability to express force through a range of motion at high velocity, so basically repeated hopping type activities. But interestingly, if you get a child or a youth athlete to hop as far as they can, what you'll often find is that they stutter and lose their balance. This is where hop and stop activities, or indeed precision jumps, are going to help build up that dynamic balance, which again is going to contribute to athletes' ability to decelerate or at least slow themselves down. The second one is reactive strength. So this is basically the end stage of your plyometric work. Check out my previous blogs on P2P coaching if you want a list of my progressions for that. Eccentric strength, which, although you think you're going to develop that ability to break just by the lowering phases in lifting, really, if we're properly working eccentric strength, it needs to be supramaximal. So this means lowering weights you cannot lift. So an example might be, in a more practical context, might be jumping off a curb and then landing. Because if you jump from maximal height off a curb, then you're landing with an amount of force that you cannot otherwise produce if you were just to jump up and land normally. And the final one is power. So again, power, bit of a misnomer. We want to focus on the rate of force absorption as well as increasing the power. This is why I believe that learning to land is so important in the early phases of plyometric training. So whilst you're rarely, if ever, going to get an athlete to come to a complete stop in sports, you are going to appreciate what William Wayland and recent podcast guest Jeffrey Chew spoke about in terms of second order effects. Yes, you don't stop on come to a complete stop in sports, but you're developing the ability of the body to resist buckling, if you will. From a technical standpoint, in terms of deceleration, it depends on the level of athletes you're working with. And by level, I don't mean competency, I mean cognition. So for example, if you're working with young athletes, or children as I like to call them, you might want to drip feed one cue at a time and design a game that works on that one cue. So Brett Klicker's Edge of the Earth drill, if you haven't seen that, check it out. Or equally, one that I like is just a simple game of Bulldog with some deceleration zones, which kids basically have to come to a complete stop in, or at least slow down in, before they can continue, and they can't get caught in these zones. So easy ways of progressing that is you have the deceleration zones further into the game, so that the children you're working with have a greater chance to build up more velocity because they're running further before they're forced to stop. Or you can progress it by having a smaller zone, so they're required to brake a lot more sharply. So with really young kids, I'd probably use the gamified version of developing the technical qualities. And for kids who are older, or perhaps more cognitively aware, or who can take more instruction, that's when I'd start diving into the technical model of basically getting in a tunnel, so lowering their hips as they come into that deceleration. I'd be focusing on what they're doing after that deceleration, because let's face it, as I said earlier, you rarely come to a complete stop in sports and you're going to need something to do after it. I would initially limit the potential movement opportunities thereafter, i.e. in sport there's going to be an infinite number of potential what happens next opportunities, whereas if you're using more closed drills, then you can really hone in on the technique. Equally, if you feel like you need to do a bit of both, 1, to keep kids engaged, then do it, and 2, just to see how well the movement pattern holds up with a little bit of abstraction, then by all means go for it. Make sure you're getting kids practicing their deceleration off of both legs. I wouldn't worry about doing it under fatigue unless they're at a really high level of competency, or you just want to see what their movement looks like under fatigue. And finally, like I said, changing direction or decelerating off both legs, doing it fresh with lower entry velocities to start off with, so shorter distances, building that up to higher distances, eventually introducing some kind of stimuli or action to do after they've stopped moving, and potentially get them used to slowing down first before you come into a complete stop. It's very easy to think that athletes are going to go balls to the wall and stop as fast as you want them to just because you've asked them to. But the reality is the brain is going to be involved in that. And if it doesn't think it's got the ability to slow itself down without hurting itself, then you're not going to get kids, or adults for that matter, sprinting flat out if their body doesn't have the capability to slow themselves down. Hope you found this useful. A little bit longer video than I expected. I'd be keen to hear how others program deceleration, or what games you've tried to develop the one technical cue at a time. Drop your comments below. Let me know.